Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Mr. Bollinger, I want to thank you particularly for being here, for taking the time to be here, for sharing your story. And I just want to say I'm so sorry that what happened to you has happened to you. Thank you for being willing to share about it, but it will help us do something about it so it doesn't happen to other people. Can I just ask you, when your company forced you to sign the non-compete, what did they tell you about it at the time? I mean, did they say that, oh, this is not really a big deal, you just need to sign this? I mean, were you given any kind of, did anybody explain it and say, it's going to prevent you from working, basically, in the future?
There was no meeting. There was no explanation. No one sat us down and went through it and explained anything to us. It was given to us. It was in an envelope in my mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing really was explained.
Yeah, I imagine that's all too typical. It's almost what we lawyers call a contract of adhesion. But thank you again for your testimony. Mr. Lettieri, I want to ask you, in 2016, the Treasury Department published a report on non-compete agreements, and they made a number of findings, and I just want to give you a chance to respond to some of these. These are potential economic justifications for non-compete agreements. So I just wonder what you might think of these. One of them is, non-competes are necessary for firms to protect trade secrets. Anything to that?
I'll just pick up where Dr. Starr left off. The state of California is home to many of the most trade secret-intensive, IP-intensive companies in the world. It is the crown jewel of worldwide innovation and technology. If non-competes were necessary to protect trade secrets, Silicon Valley would not exist.
How about this? Non-competes encourage investment in workers. What do you think about that?
Sure. So there is some evidence that in narrow circumstances, non-competes can be associated with firm investment in workers. What we have to be mindful of is the trade-off. And for policymakers, the question is not what's the benefit to an individual firm or employee, it's what are the broader benefits or harms to the economy and to the labor market. And so what we find over and over again in research is that non-competes and strict enforcement of non-competes are associated with depressed wages throughout a labor market, depressed innovation and firm formation throughout a labor market, regardless of specific instances of individualized benefit to an employee or a firm. So again, I think even where there may be a reasonable case that in an individual circumstance there could be a benefit to the transaction, what policymakers have to keep in mind is what's the broader harm.
That's a great point. The effect on the labor market, I think, is a really important point, and the effect of wages across the board. What about this? Non-competes help firms screen for workers who are likelier to stick with the company for the long haul. Thoughts on that one?
Again, I think it's the wrong tool for that task. If an employer wants an employee to stick with them for the long haul, they could try radical ideas like paying better, offering better benefits, creating a better work environment, and that, again, the presumption should be that employees should be free to go market their labor.
Thanks for all of that. It seems to me that based on the Treasury's report here and the testimony you've offered today, and both of your work and research, that we know employers benefit from non-competes, discrete individual employers, but workers and the labor market as a whole seems to be an entirely different matter. Let me ask you one other thing, Mr. Starr. I'll start with you on this one. I'm from Missouri, and in Missouri we have a large rural population, and so in these cases, in smaller towns like the one I grew up in, if there are not that many employers. So if you've got a non-compete in your contract, you don't always have and then you find you want to change jobs. I mean, you don't always have the opportunity to move somewhere. It's not easy just to go and find, oh, there's 10 other employers who'll take me, or I got to uproot my family and move somewhere where I don't have social support. The rest of my family's not there. People don't want to do that quite reasonably. So could you give us a sense of how non-competes might impact areas and regions with labor markets like that in smaller rural areas?
I think that there's two things that are relevant. The first is that if there are only a few employers in there and you've knocked out the other ones with a non-compete, then absolutely you are. We have what we would call monopsony, where you have one buyer of labor in the market, and we know that when we have monopsony, we have lower wages and reduced employment. The other dual effect to think about is that non-competes are also product market restrictions. You can't enter and start a new company, and so you're going to sustain this kind of low, really highly concentration of firms.
Thank you. That's a great point. And I think that, again, as somebody who comes from a rural area, this is a problem that we see frequently, that it is difficult. New firm formation is difficult. It's difficult to start a new job, find workers, and it's difficult for workers like Mr. Bollinger who want to change jobs but don't necessarily want to move to a whole other region or place to actually have the freedom to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on this really important topic for our workers.
Thank you.